So, Mick, this Sunday we are talking about suffering, and this is in relation to Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 11, chapter 11, where he talks about his struggles, his sufferings for the sake of his faithfulness in Christ, but also for the gospel. Now, I've known you for now coming up to 3 years, and I've known that you've had struggles, in the recent past. But I've also known you to be a man of faith, a strong man of faith. And I was wondering, if you don't mind, if you could share briefly some of the struggles you've had and how, you've remained faithful and how you've seen God remain faithful to you in these times.
Well, I wouldn't equate myself with St. Paul because most of my troubles have been health troubles. Only can I perhaps, and it is a maybe, point to the fact that Trish, my wife, contracted Alzheimer's, perhaps because she went to Kabale, which is in Uganda, and of course we spent a short time in Uganda. But I don't know, I just suspect. So in that sense, some of my troubles were because I was faithful to the gospel, like Paul. Other troubles have, like anybody else, have just come upon me. What happened? Trish, my wife, Pat, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and at the same time, I had read a verse in Ezekiel in which God said to Ezekiel, "I'm going to take the delight of your eyes, I'm going to take it away." And that night, his wife died. And it was about the same time that Trish was diagnosed, and I took that as being that it wasn't so much why it was allowed that she had Alzheimer's, but I was to react, or we were to react, more or less as Ezekiel did, and not let it get us down. Alzheimer's is a terrible disease. Somebody described it as a slow death, and that's how it appears. Slowly she was taken from me, bit by bit, until eventually she died physically. That was the first thing. And so that was quite difficult to cope with, although I have to say that although she did some very, very odd things, she was never difficult. And when she went into the nursing home eventually, she hardly spoke, but she was recognized as a person of grace. And I think that was because over the years she had been changed, transformed by her faith, by her belief, by Jesus Christ. So that her faith actually shone through, even though she could not speak.
Did her faith encourage your own faith as well? In all of
well, we worked together. Yes, she was my rock in a way, and I did rely on her. And in many ways, I hoped that I would die first, because I didn't know how I was going to manage without her. But of course, things developed differently, and she has gone now, physically. So that was the first thing. And while I was busy, in a way, looking after her, I was diagnosed with cancer. What happened was there was a phone call. I'd had a blood test, and there was a phone call, and they said that I was fast-tracked. I thought that I was fast-tracked because I was a carer. But no, I was fast-tracked because they suspected cancer. And I was inspected by a surgeon who knew about these things. And he said, he didn't say that I had cancer, but he thought that I had cancer. And I had to have a biopsy, which confirmed that I had cancer. Now, I thought, I was worried, not so much what cancer would do to me, but how was I going to care for Trish? How was I going to care for her while I had cancer? But the church, people from the church helped. And when there was nobody to take us, I went with Trish and left her with some people called the Fountain Trust at Royal Surrey who looked after her while I was treated. I did have to go into hospital and she went into care for a few days. After a few years, I was pronounced pretty clear, all clear, and I was handed over to the GP and told just to have a blood test every 6 months. But the things, Trish developed Alzheimer's and she became worse. And eventually she couldn't stand. So at that point, I thought that I could no longer care for her and she would have to go into a nursing home. The social services took care for a while, but I was told, and I assumed, wrongly it turns out, that I had to find a place for her. So I didn't know where to go. And most of the care homes, if they were social services care homes, I didn't like. And if they required extra money, I couldn't afford it, or I thought I couldn't afford it. And so I looked at several places and time was running out, I thought. And I was going to a place in Chobham to have a look at it and make a decision. And I had 1 day left. And as I passed Kettlewell House at the bottom of Kettlewell Hill, I thought, well, I'll go and have a look at this. So I went in and saw the manager, and she showed me around, and it seemed quite a homely place. And she said to me, had I lived in Woking all my life? And I said, yes, apart from when I worked abroad. And she said, where did you work? And I said, Uganda, whereabouts? And so I told her, and it turned out that she also had worked in that part of Uganda. And she believed, she was a convinced Christian herself. Although she'd employed all sorts of people, Muslims and Christians and non-Christians. Anyway, she was a Christian. And so I thought, I went no further. There was this link, and I took Trish to that nursing home. She was there for about 5 years. I cared for her about 10 years. And she was in nursing home for about 5 years, steadily getting worse. And eventually her brain was not functioning, but it was affecting her body, which slowly was curling up. And eventually she died. The death certificate said that it was COVID-19, partly, but there is some doubt because she wasn't tested. There is some doubt. While this was happening, I had a stroke. So I got up in one Sunday morning and I was due to lead a communion service. And so I thought I'd have a cup of tea, then I'd have my quiet time and read the Bible and pray. But as I put the kettle on and I was waiting for it to boil, I heard a peculiar noise in my ears, and everything went round and round and round. And I reached out to try and stop myself falling, but I couldn't, and I ended up on the floor. And the trouble was that I couldn't get up. I didn't understand what happened, but I was on the floor and I couldn't get up. And so as I lay there, I began to wonder how long I would stay there before somebody realised there was something wrong. I thought perhaps I'd have to wait till 8 o'clock in the evening when my son was probably going to ring me. But somebody at Sutton Green Church, All Souls, was puzzled why I didn't turn up. And she thought something must be wrong. And she came and rescued me. Well, she came and the fire brigade broke in and the medics came and I was rescued and taken to hospital, where I remained for several weeks. And underwent rehabilitation. The trouble, I didn't feel any pain, and I thought I could do everything. I thought I could stand, I could walk, I could do everything, but I couldn't. So I had to learn to get in and out of the wheelchair and things like that. I had to be taken to the toilets. So, but things did improve, and eventually they discharged me and I came home. Fortunately, my youngest son was having something done to he and his wife were having their flat renovated, and they had to vacate it. And he was in the house for the first few weeks. And then the carers came in, and I slowly improved. But the thing that really got me was they told me that if you had a stroke, it might take a long time to recover, but I would recover, they said. And but it might take even 2 years. So I prayed, but I prayed very specifically that God would heal me completely in 1 year. And then I was going to preach at All Souls, Sutton Green, and I was going to say that God had healed me. What a wonderful God he is. That was my prayer. And of course, as I improved, I thought it seemed the prayer was being answered. But a year passed and I still walked peculiarly and I still couldn't use the left hand at all. The prayer had been answered in a way which didn't please me at all. I did preach, but I had to preach as a stroke victim, not as a healed person. And
can you remember Can you remember the first time you preached? Because there's a reason I ask.
Well, after the stroke?
Yeah.
Exactly a year.
Yeah. Do you remember where it was and what day it was?
Yeah, it was at Sutton Green.
Yeah. Was it at Sutton Green? I thought it was at St. Peter's because there's
No, it was at Sutton Green.
Okay, go on. Yeah.
And the person who rescued me and to whom I owed so much, she was there. But I was very annoyed with God because he hadn't answered. Because I thought that by healing me and by standing up, and I fondly imagined that God would have the glory. But of course, I was thinking of myself. As I look back, I was thinking more of myself than of God's glory. But so all this time, of course, since I'd had stroke, I hadn't read the Bible or hadn't read anything actually. And I hadn't prayed. And when God didn't answer, I did pray, but it was a complaint to God. And then I thought, well, why didn't he answer? And I began to wonder whether, in fact, there was a God.
So you questioned.
So I questioned for the first time since I became a Christian. I questioned the existence of God. I had had challenges, but this was the first time I questioned the existence of God. So I thought back. I had watched the programs about the formation of the solar system and the magnificent and beautiful photographs that were shown on television. I thought about that. I thought about the time in Uganda when I'd had to go to the toilet in the early hours of the morning, and I looked up, and there was no moon, there was no artificial light, and the starlit sky was absolutely beautiful. And it was awe-inspiring and took my breath away. So I thought of the creation of the solar system. I thought of the universe. And then I thought back to the time when I was studying to botany, A-level botany, and I looked through a microscope and saw the structure of the stem, the cells that make up the stem. I saw microscopic wildlife life, and so I began to wonder, was all this an accident? And then I looked at my wife's lifeless form at the undertakers, and I began to wonder about life itself. And so was all this an accident, or did it indicate that God had created? At the same time, I was reading a book which was called The God I Do Not Understand. And so there was pressure in a way that not to believe in God. But although in one sense, this is what I believed, there was also the question of whereabouts was I in this creation. I thought that there was a creator, and I thought there was a being that controlled the universe. And the thing that made me turn back to my belief, and my belief as a Christian, was that there is also somebody who cares. And so although I was reading this book that I do not understand, the God I do not understand, I put together what I did understand, and I did understand that there was a creator, there was a controller, and there was a carer. And of course, this is the most amazing thing, that in the whole universe, that there is God who not only creates the universe, but cares about me. And I am just a small speck in this creation. And something which I do not understand about God is that he should care for me. So this is taking more than 6 minutes.
No, it's fine. I'm really encouraged that, and the Psalms do talk about it, even if, and we exactly that, it's just a tiny.
So I did think about there was a creator, there was a God, and there was a God who cared. what about prayer?
Mm.
Because I did question whether the prayers were answered. And so I didn't pray. And I thought to myself, well, God knows what I think.
Mm.
What's the point of praying? But there was this insistence. I kept thinking of verses like, ask anything in my name and I will grant their requests. And if you ask anything, well, there was the insistence in the Bible, the call to prayer. And so although my prayers changed slightly, I began to pray. And so that I came full circle, believing in God, believing in prayer. And although my prayer is more relational than requesting, I do spend time each day in prayer. But my prayers are much more relational than making requests.
And just to be clear, you mean relational to God, you and God,
that's right. So
personal.
I talk to him in effect, and tell him about things that concern me. I know he knows, and I keep referring to him as he, although I have my own private name for God. And although I went through this period, I found that in searching for God, I actually encountered a God much greater, much more glorious than I had ever encountered before. So that I agree with C.S. Lewis, who said that God whispers in the good times, or through the good times. He shouts through the suffering. Suffering is his megaphone, he says. And I learned a lot more about God through my difficulties than I ever did through the good times.
Mick, that's just really encouraging, and I hope and pray that anyone that finds themselves in a place of suffering and struggle will be encouraged by your faith and what you've gone through and how faithful you remained and how God has been faithful to you. And maybe I wonder if there's a piece of advice you'd want to give to anyone that might be struggling, especially in this season of COVID. There's a lot of people, suffering, and, being a Christian is taking up your cross. In a way, it's a choice. It's a choice Paul had to make, to suffer for Christ. What encouragement would you give someone like that?
I would pass on something that was with me even when I wasn't praying and even when I didn't believe in God in a way. And it's something that happened immediately following the stroke, because when you go to hospital, one of the things is that you feel very much alone. You may be in a ward with all sorts of people, but there is this loneliness that you feel. And the thing that I kept in my mind was, no, never alone. There was a song we used to sing years ago. No, never alone. Oh, I can't remember it. Anyway, the fact is that even in the times when things were difficult and right the way through, the fact I never felt alone because God was with me. Even when everything around me was difficult and life was difficult. I was never alone. God was always at hand, as it were, and I felt that that presence, although I never actually saw anything that resembled a presence, but I felt a presence with me.
Mick, that's brilliant. Thank you ever so much for sharing that. You know, I found it really quite powerful, and I hope whoever is listening, and you know, especially if you're struggling at this time, that just you're reminded by Mick's last advice there that God promises to be with us in our suffering, in our pains. You know, He's been on the cross, He's died for us, He's gone through it, so He knows, and He's there with us. So thank you so much, Mick. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, but I'm a bit concerned about the time factor.
What? Let me first pause.